So, welcome everyone to Coffee with Clarity, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Peter. So, Mr. Peter, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Peter Beckway, and I'm the head of academic training and professional development here at Sarasa.
So, Mr. Peter, today we are going to talk about a very important topic, which definitely will provide some perspective to teachers who possibly are aspiring to go international, and or teachers who are looking forward to enhance their skill set as a teacher as well, to be more effective in the classroom.
Right.
So, a very first question that I would like to ask is, what are authentic assessments and why is it important to use this in the classroom?
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought up this topic of using authentic assessments because it's incredibly important. Typically, what teachers do is, especially at the beginning of their career, is that they rely on what we call objective tests. So the students take a test or a quiz, and it's usually multiple choice, true and false, matching, fill in the blank, or short answer. And while those types of assessments can be effective at times, they don't really cover the range of skills that we're hoping students develop in our classrooms. So an authentic assessment is basically an assessment where students can show a set of skills, not just one skill, a set of skills that overlap, that sort of relate to the subject that they're learning. So in other words, an authentic assessment is either a performance or a presentation or a project. Okay, so instead of taking merely an objective assessment, we are creating a presentation, a project, or a performance for our students where they can show a wide range of skills that are useful and applicable in other contexts.
Well, I believe that definitely makes learning more dimensional, It definitely allows the children to also showcase what they have learned in the classroom. And all the more, it makes the class more interactive as well. And also, it will inspire the other peers as well, when their classmate is presenting, then they definitely will get enhanced with a certain amount of knowledge. And of course, the one who is presenting will also enhance their skill set as well, in terms of presentation skills, in terms of public speaking, in terms of confidence.
Right.
So I definitely do get why is it very much effective compared to the conventional way of teaching.
Right. The other thing that's important to remember, so one of the ways that an authentic assessment becomes authentic is if it has, let's say, an authentic audience.
Exactly.
So for example, if the students are doing a presentation, sure, they could do it in their classroom, but maybe you invite other people into the classroom, parents, other teachers, other students, or maybe you could move the assessment, that presentation or project outside the classroom. Maybe sign up to use the auditorium or the theater at your school so the students, when they're presenting, have that authentic experience of presenting before an authentic audience.
Excellent. So basically, it's not a simulation, but it's basically, an in-hand experience.
Yes.
Where they can have, a lot of dialogue with the audience themselves.
Right. And I like that word that you used. It's not a simulation. So they're not faking a presentation.
Exactly.
They're not faking a performance for just merely their classmates. It is a real performance for a real public. The other thing that makes it authentic is, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not just one skill, which oftentimes our objective tests are more about recall. But when you're doing an authentic assessment, when you're delivering a presentation or building a project or performing, there are many, many different types of skills that a student is involved with doing a presentation. So they need to speak in a certain way. They need to hold themselves in a certain way. They have to be organized, right? So there's many different skills that overlap and can be used in other contexts. That's the most important point.
I believe it's more of a detailed version or an evolved version of Feynman technique. I'm sure you must have heard about Feynman technique as well, right? Where
No.
well, the Professor Feynman, he was a physicist. So, in order for him to make teaching more effective in his classroom, he being a physicist, right? What he suggests is that any concept of physics, right? Make sure that you teach it to someone in order to learn it even more, and you teach it in a way that even an infant can understand the concept. So, a complex problem, you are explaining it to them in a very simplest of manner. So, this, what you just mentioned, is a very much of a detailed version of Feynman technique. That's what I, could relate with. So, can you give me an example from your own teaching experience as well?
Sure. So I'll give you a couple. So I remember once I was teaching, I was a high school English teacher. So we were doing a unit on Shakespeare, we were reading Macbeth, and we had a more kind of traditional assessment at the end of the unit. But the other thing that we did, and it wasn't just me, this was as a department, right? I'm not making these decisions unilaterally. We collaborate, we come up with these assessments as a group. And so one of the things that we came up with was the students created a podcast. So in other words, they created personas, they created the title, and they created a podcast, like a Shakespeare podcast, where they would discuss Shakespeare. And on this particular episode, they were discussing Macbeth. And so, like I said, they had to create personas, they had to write a script, they had to perform it, they had to record it, right? They had to add a commercial break, they had to include music and sound effects, and then they presented the final edited version to the class.
Excellent. This is something that I can contemplate. It's a very unique way of teaching, but of course it's a very modern and very effective way of teaching as well.
You also mentioned earlier about team teaching, right? Teaching each other as the best way to learn. So one of the things that we did in one of my IB classes is we were required to cover a number of different poems by a specific poet. There were maybe 15 or 20 poems. Now what I did was I covered maybe 4 or 5, and I modeled how these poems should be interpreted, read, analyzed, how you annotate, how you draw larger conclusions about various themes. And I modeled that, and then afterwards I shifted the burden to the students. So they got in groups of 2 or 3, they were each assigned a poem, and they had to create a PowerPoint presentation, and they were to teach that poem to their classmates and then generate a discussion after their analysis. So they became the teachers. And these weren't like short presentations, like 10 minutes. These were like 25 to 30 minutes where they are teaching the poem from beginning to end. And so having that type of authentic assessment really demonstrates whether they understand how to read a poem, how to analyze it for figurative language, and how to perform and teach that poem in front of their classmates.
That's interesting. And also, I would like to ask, how do you grade authentic assessments?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So typically, authentic assessments are graded with a rubric, okay? Because you wouldn't use a rubric for a multiple choice exam because there's a right or wrong answer. So with an authentic assessment, because there's so many skills being assessed at the same time, you want to develop a really effective rubric where you're able to highlight the criteria that you're looking for in a project, in a performance, or in a presentation. And so not only can you identify the criteria by which you assess your students, but also the point of a rubric is there is a range, right? There are performance indicators, okay? And so performance indicators would be like on a rubric, let's say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so there's a range of performance skills. Okay, so you as a teacher can look at a student's performance and then use the rubric in order to grade how well they do something. So for example, if a student is giving a presentation, like a PowerPoint presentation, you could grade their communication skills. You could grade their organizational skills. You could grade their ability to articulate the content knowledge that you're looking for, those types of skills.
Okay, so Mr. Peter, I would like to ask you one question
Sure.
about rubrics.
Yeah.
Right? So, what are the mistakes that teachers make when constructing a rubric?
What are the biggest mistakes? Well, let's use an analytic rubric as an example. That's the most common, that's the most versatile type of rubric that can be used, okay? So whenever you're creating a rubric to assess students in their performances, projects, or presentations, you first have to determine the criteria by which you are assessing them. So if a learner is giving a presentation, you would need to ask yourself, what are the aspects of giving an effective presentation that I want to be able to look at and potentially measure, okay? So one of them might be their communication skills. Another criteria might be their organizational skills. Another criteria might be how their slides communicate information, right? Are they able to engage their audience, right? So these are just 4 things, right? And you could determine those in advance and create a rubric where you could assess their performance, okay? Now the mistake is when teachers create criteria or identify criteria that are hard to measure, okay? So you want to make sure that it's something that you can actually measure. Another common mistake is that every performance level has a descriptor that describes that performance, but they need to be demarcated clearly. What sometimes teachers do is the descriptors will overlap, so you cannot tell the difference between a 2 or a 3 or a 3 and a 4, and so they need to be written in a way that you can clearly identify it, okay? Another problem is you always want to make sure that your rubrics are student friendly. They're written in a way that students can understand. Oftentimes, rubrics are written for teachers rather than students. And so if anybody has ever seen like an IB rubric, you know, they're very difficult to decipher sometimes. When I worked with my students, I actually had to teach them how to read the rubric, because if a student just merely read it on their own, they probably wouldn't understand it. So you want to make sure that those descriptors are written in a way that students can understand them, okay? And then the final thing that I think is really important to understand about rubrics, if they are written properly, you are not interpreting their performance. What you are doing is you are looking at their performance and you are noticing it on the rubric, that you've written the rubric in such a way that when you look at a performance, you can easily match their performance to the descriptor that best aligns with what you see in front of you. And that's the best way to score it. So in other words, you're not interpreting what they are doing. You are looking at what they're doing, you are looking at the product, you are looking at the performance, and you are matching it to the descriptor on your rubric. And that's the best way to be fair in your assessment. Okay?
So, Mr. Peter, it has been an intellectually enriching conversation with you, of course. and I hope the coffee was good as well.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we'll keep it for the next time. And thank you so much for this conversation.
All right. Thank you, my
Thank you so
friend.
much. Thank
Thank
so
you.
much.